My name is Bill Morton. I'm from Alberta originally, and in 1969 I went to Japan out of my own interest and took with me the request to put together exhibitions that would come to Alberta, especially for the opening of the art school. So with my list in hand, I ended up going to Kyoto and met Mr. Kunio Isa, and he said he knew quite a few people on my list, since that included many craftspeople in Kyoto. So he took me to meet these people, and I took slides of the work, and so these eventually became slide exhibitions, or exhibitions like Mr. Isa's, who showed in the opening of the Alberta College of Art and Design. His one-man show of kimono, obis, and works on paper. It included the two Illingworth Kerr galleries, and there were 14 kimonos and about the same number of obis. So it was a huge exhibition. So now, when he was here with that show, I came with him to help hang it. He offered me a kind of position, a helper position, to help him in his studio, drawing designs for kimono. So I certainly was happy to say yes. So I started doing that job. And then my tourist visa ran out in about 8 months. I came back to Canada for a year. Then I got a culture visa to go to Japan with Mr. Isa as my sponsor. And he sponsored me then all the rest of the time I stayed. I stayed well over 10 years working in his studio. And in the beginning I was doing drawings for kimono design. But then after a few months I asked if I could also learn the dyeing technique. So I moved to the other part of the studio with 14 dyers, and they helped me bit by bit to learn technique and control, and eventually started doing the full kimonos for my teacher, Mr. Isa, and gradually worked up to have quite a high skill level. And after 10 years, it's amazing the skill you acquire doing it every day. So let's see, after that I came back in 1983 and started working at the Alberta College of Art, and I worked there until 1 year ago, the June of 2020. So I'm now working in the studio in Ramsey, and I'm part of the Burns Visual Arts Society. So we have a community of artists who work together, and we do projects with the public and have open house in the fall and that kind of thing. So it's wonderful to be in this new studio. So this is the pattern for making a kimono, and it's the traditional one. So when you buy a bolt, you buy a bolt for kimono. So it's 15 inches wide and up to 12 meters in length. So it's quite a lot of fabric. So when you're cutting the fabric, you start at the beginning where you're opening the bolt. The bolt goes here. So you cut the left sleeve, the left body part, and then the center, which is this part here, which includes the two front panels and the collar, then the right body part and the right sleeve. That's the correct way of cutting. It's done that way so that weavers could have a change all the way across, which could be reflected in the actual construction of the garment. So it's designed right from the beginning to be cut that way. So, and these are all the proportions and the distances, and also these little marks describe where the stitches would be. you begin at the front, and this is the front flap. And so you need to be fairly high here, because when you're sitting for tea, you want to be able to see the design on the top of your knees. Now this is a very high design, which typically would be for quite a young person. Normally older women would wear a design that was maybe even half the height, and so there's an important emphasis there. And in the movement of Japanese dance and tea ceremony, it's important that you at least are able to see more clearly different parts of the kimono. So obviously you see the bottom front, because it's over the knees, and the guests sitting in the tea house are on the right and behind. So that means that they'd be looking at the shoulder, the top, the back of the arm. So that's important. In movement with Japanese dance, often the right hand is in a position above the heart, whereas there's an extension of the left arm. So the design is also on the inside of the left, on the actual garment as well. And then this is the sleeve with the outstretched arm, usually the left. So you can see clearly the pattern on this side. This part of the design here is, of course, right in this position on the left of the neck. So it's very important that it be kind of delicate and kind of, this is kind of exceptional because it is a bit large, but it often fits into this other part, which is the kensui. So this is the most tricky part if you're dyeing all pieces to connect. But it's quite high on the collar, as you can see when the collar is up. That would be on the neck, somewhat like that. So these are constructed and then lined, and the lining also must conform to color and design of the kimono. So these are all brush blended designs that I've done along with the pieces I've dyed. So there's a certain way of putting them together across the back, standard way of doing it. To heat the heel to keep the tip hot. You can't just go like that. The students, it takes a while to learn that too. You need to heat it right up to there. These are made from rabbit, especially for the wax. So we get a nice. And then this little bit here. It's always a good idea to look at the good side and see how the wax, see if it has texture the way you want it to. See these little lines here. That'll fill in with the color we brush it with on top. When you're first starting out, the brushing, it's very tedious, and you need a lot of experience to get really good at it, and it's very tiring. So partway through my training, when I went into the dye studio, they gave me backgrounds to do. So on all these kimonos that they had done all this technique on, I got the direction of what color to put on it. So I do kimono after kimono. And they're 12 meters long, so you really had a day's workout when you were doing them. It's a good experience though. When you're using color, this technique is called hikizome. Okay, I'm going to take a different color, sort of a purpley red now. Changing the color so we can see what the previous colors were. I'm kind of replacing the color, in fact. So sometimes you can work from the back but then rub on the front as well. But if you do that, you have to make sure you rub it on the good side as well. This is a very rough guideline, so don't forget it, because it's so hard to see these. The wax is paraffin with 10% microcrystalline. Microcrystalline prevents cracking, and it's a high temperature wax. It's a byproduct of the petroleum industry, It's just often called micro wax is actually what it is. If I want it to cool, I just leave it for a second and then go back, and then I get a little definition on the edge. Okay, I'm going to leave that one. Trying to apply just a very light touch so I get more detail with less wax coming through. Like, and I wipe the extra moisture away too. So I'm keeping these really pure until I decide, like, I'll be putting color on the whole thing anyway, so I want more control, in other words. You could just leave it and see what happens, that's fun too. problem takes care of itself, really. You don't have to do very much. And now that I brush the silk so much, the dye enters very easily. I don't know if you can tell that, but it just so much easier as you get into it. Yeah, there, that's good. These kind of brushes are called bake, and the pointed ones are called fude. So here's where it's cut. So I'm taking part of this rose for the other side. I did that here too. You see that a lot in Japanese design, where things are going off the format. The implication is there's more out there, you know what I mean? Very good, okay. See how much easier it gets? It stays where you put it. That's because of all the brushing. After this one, I can darken that edge. But too much dye for the water that's there. It just runs. Easy to fix, though. Maybe I'll just soften everything up. And you see the line there? That's definitely the pink. And it's not very dark, so it's not going to jump out or anything. And then we just a little bit of it. You can kind of see it here. See the different textures there? It's supposed to be a rose, so it doesn't have very strong delineation. It's just more of a surface change. Of course, the back is all wax, so you can't see as much. Actually, you see the strokes a little differently.